Hello and welcome back to Finding Your Niche, or Finding My Niche, or whatever we're going to call this thing. Just wanted to sit down and chat about marketing and branding and what I'm thinking through as I'm doing work for some of the clients I'm working for. So here it is. I hope you enjoy. Okay, question of the day. Does marketing even work? So a couple of answers to that. Probably. Also maybe, but could maybe not work. Also, it depends and yes. So I've thought about all these answers at several times the last few months and years, and I think I've come to the conclusion that it depends and kind of. So it's kind of a radical thing for a guy that's trying to run a marketing and media company to say, as that's pretty much the core of our business at Willow Creek Media, but I think it's important to address. So first of all, what is this thing that we're calling marketing? From what I've seen and I guess experienced so far, I think that marketing is communicating what you do via audio, visual, or written content with your target audience with the hopes that this will do one of two things. Number one, encourage them to buy what you're selling right on the spot. And then number two, make them aware of your product or service. So when they do need it, they'll remember you and your brand and buy from you. So that said, how do we know if what we're doing is working in marketing? So for the first example, it's generally pretty straightforward. So the first example is they just buy what you're selling right on the spot. So pretty straightforward. If you're trying to sell something on the spot, you can just compare how much you spent on ads and compare that against how much revenue you brought in on those products or services. And this process actually gets a lot simpler when you're trying to measure everything online. You can literally see which ads lead to the most sales and just run those more frequently. And hopefully that will continue in perpetuity. Most times it doesn't, but you can take advantage of it in the short run. The second example gets a bit more complex or vague, or however you want to look at it. It's not as clear, and I think can only be measured indirectly over time. So this is essentially what branding is, and this is the area that I love to work in because I am not the type of guy to go out and sell and ask people for a million things. I'd rather just do something, and hopefully people will figure out what we're doing, and hopefully I can make people aware of what I'm doing just by sharing it with them through things like a podcast like this right here. So this is a little bit more difficult to measure the success of it, but you can measure it a few different ways. So you can see your social media growth over time and check that against your goals, subscription growth if you have a subscription service, revenue growth. And there's also a handful of other top line metrics that you can use to measure the success of this in your business. But I guess a big question is, how does this stuff work? And does it work? So if it's done right, it should work, but it's difficult to judge what is the right way to do things because pretty much everything in marketing is subjective. So me, Jake Kranz, standing here, I could make a judgment call on what I think people would want if I was selling Cheetos. I would assume that target market would be people that know Frito-Lay products and also happen to have maybe a poor diet, or they've just always really enjoyed Cheetos. Maybe they live in the Midwest and they are 35 years old, single, and also buy X, Y, and Z product. Now I can make that judgment call, but what you'll find out really quickly is that me saying that does not necessarily correlate or directly cause the actual market to do those things. So I could go in with those assumptions, but find out something completely different. So back to where I was getting to, the most important thing to combat that is just testing things and seeing what works and sticking with things that are working, and making sure in the beginning, on the onset, that you set goals to compare down the road to see if it is working. And I'm using quotation fingers right now because working is obviously subjective. So you have to do something to measure whether or not something's working. You can set goals with a few of the metrics that I mentioned before, like social media growth, or revenue. But it's interesting because there's another part to it, and it's something that you can't really see on paper. And I would consider it momentum. It's something that you can feel, and it's something that you'll only understand if you're actually on the ground with your customers and experiencing what they're experiencing and listening to what they have to say about your product. But that is how you do it with the long-term branding play. But if you want to really set up a business for success in the long term, I still personally think the best way to build awareness around what you're doing is by delivering a phenomenal product or service and by treating the people you work with really, really well. So your customers and also your employees, but mainly your customers. So if people love it, I mean, they're going to share it with others, and you'll never need to worry about marketing your brand. With Willow Creek, I don't think I've put any money into advertising at all. I put time into things like this podcast and just having conversations with people, but I've literally never marketed it at all, which is kind of ironic, but all of my business has come through word of mouth marketing. And I think a lot of that has to do with me just doing everything I can possible to make sure that my clients' lives are happy and their marketing departments within their businesses are successful. But outside of that, there's just a few things that you need to keep in mind when going through this whole marketing process and figuring out whether or not this whole thing works. So number one, obviously you've got to set goals and make sure that you're measuring against them on a quarterly basis or annual basis, whatever you want that time metric to be. And in order to get to those goals, you definitely need to spend time marketing directly to your audience. So you need to be having conversations with people that fall into your niche, trying to figure out what they want, ask them questions, figure out where their needs are, what you can do to satisfy them. And I think one thing that's also important there is figuring out what you don't want to do that people do want, and making that judgment call, because you can also get into a situation where you're trying to do 100 different things because people say they want X, Y, and Z, but you're not happy doing X, Y, and Z. And maybe your business would just be better off if you weren't doing those things. So those are important things to keep in mind as well. The other thing to do is build awareness around what you're doing. So this is more of the long-term thing. Like I mentioned, it'd be through something like a podcast like I'm doing right now, or a YouTube series, or you could just do really subtle things like updating your LinkedIn profile, adding your company's name to your email signature, sharing what you do with literally everybody you know and making sure that they know what you're doing. I guess you can also ask for referrals from your existing clients, but you don't necessarily have to do that. And I'll get to that in a second. So the third thing I think you should really be doing is testing different ideas and strategies. Going back to my point from before, a lot of marketing is subjective. So you'll never really know what's going to work until the market tells you. And it's okay if your experiments fail. Experiments fail in marketing all the time. And if you're running events, you'll run into situations where you only have like 10 people show up to an event. Other times you'll have 1,000 people show up. And for products, you'll roll out a huge line of products and you're going to think you're going to sell 1 million units, and you end up selling 150,000, and it breaks the bank, but you end up surviving, and you learn from it, and you move on. The best thing about marketing is that even if an experiment fails, you're able to learn something about your audience at that specific time, and you're able to learn to A, not do that again, but B, what they might enjoy more, knowing the things that you know that they don't enjoy. So definitely test different ideas and strategies. And the last thing is just be sure to invest in creating an incredible product or service. I personally think that's the best way to grow what you're doing is through the work that you're currently doing, making people happy and ensuring that they share it with others. So I'm going to end it on that. Just a few things to think about as you ponder this whole concept of marketing and whether or not it even works and what you can do to make it work in your favor. So if you have any questions you want me to research or are unanswered for you coming out of this, please let me know. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to dig into those and share a conversation with you. So I hope you enjoyed this little Finding My Niche episode, and I will see you when I see you. Hey, this is Jake. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Finding Your Niche. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. In the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Well, I won't actually see you, but you get the point. Have a great week.